chapter is to enable you to effectively and efficiently undertake quality control based on a quality control mindset. In this section, we will study the basics needed to attain good results. If you fail the test regarding your understanding of the preliminary checkpoints, please study the provided study items. Now, please commence your study of the preliminary checkpoints. If everyone in a company thinks seriously about what products and services will satisfy customers and takes necessary actions under the Quality First principle, these efforts will lead to the long-term stability and expansion of the company. Securing and enhancing profits are essential to ensure the survival and growth of companies, and so the highest priority should be given to the improvement of the quality of their products and services. Thus, the points listed on this screen should be borne in mind. This way of thinking is known as the Quality First mindset. The customer is the one who determines the quality, and so this can also be called the Customer First mindset. Thus, the points listed on this screen should be borne in mind. This way of thinking is known as Market In. It is our customers who judge whether quality is good or bad. In a production process, the stage in which you work is called your own stage, and you should always be aware of the previous stage and the next stage. It is the next stage that judges the quality of your own stage. Thus, it is important to consider the next stage as your customer. Always try to be aware of what is found in the next stage and reflected in your work as a feedback. Whoever is affected by the results of our work must be regarded as the customer. In quality control, you should clearly know who the next stage is, and ensure that the satisfaction at the next stage is maximized. At your own stage, you should not accept defective items. You should not make defective items, nor should you send them on to the next stage. It is important to always act in this manner. A report was made that scratches were found on an automobile being built. If it were you, what would you do? Select the button that you think is appropriate and click on it. That's correct. What is important is that you check the scratches of the car yourself. Verifying the actual scratches means that you grasp the facts. It is important to make decisions and take actions based on actual facts, and not on your own speculations and assumptions. When people have accumulated a certain amount of experience, they tend to make decisions based on their experience, keiken, intuition, kan, and resolve, dokyo, which comprise KKD. However, it is important to implement quality control based on KKDD, which also includes fact-based data. The management cycle we are studying here is a review of Chapter 1, Quality Control Outline. For example, suppose the objective is to standardize the size of paper documents used in your company. What action would you take? Select the button that you think is appropriate and click on it. That's correct. Set an appropriate objective and follow through with it. The basic action required for this is plan, do, check, and act. This is the basic management procedure for quality control. By repeatedly following the basic procedures, you will reach higher control levels. This cycle is known as the management cycle, or the PDCA cycle. Standardization and continuous review. These two elements are the fundamental foundations of management action. We examined defects in automotive parts, collected data, and made a diagram like this. The number of defects of electrical equipment was the largest and accounted for a large portion of defects. Selecting the items that must be given the highest priority and implementing necessary measures for them will enhance the effectiveness of improvement. This thinking is called prioritization. With these factors kept in mind, one must implement management priority. In quality control, processes mean the methods and mechanisms of work. The quality of work depends on the work processes. If any errors are made, good results will not be achieved. Process management is important in quality control. Process management is aimed at controlling factors that have influence on the results in terms of such viewpoints as 4M. This process management concept applies to both the overall flow of the work and to each step of the work alike. In process management, it is necessary to keep these things in mind. When a problem arises, if you just deal with the superficial phenomena, your action will not lead to a fundamental solution of the problem. You must dig deeper to identify the cause of a cause. This is vital in determining the underlying root cause. This thinking is known as the source orientation. With these factors kept in mind, one must implement source control. Let's assume that Messrs. A, B, and C were engaged in the construction of the same type of house using the same materials, tools, and amount of time. Despite this, variations exist in the completed houses. It was Mr. C who built the best house. If everybody else masters his methods, anybody should be able to build the same house. This is one example of standardization. When working to attain standardization, it is important to create a manual that can be understood correctly and used efficiently by anyone, and to provide education and training based on the manual. Standardization leads to many advantages as listed here. Summarizing the contents covered in this chapter, these are the main points. Read this chapter carefully until you are confident. Then go on to the next understanding test. The purpose of this chapter is to enable you to interpret data and to conduct quality control based on the understanding of the data. In this section, we will study the meaning of terms concerning data and collecting data for QC. If you fail the test regarding your understanding of the preliminary checkpoints, please study the provided study items. Now, please commence your study of the preliminary checkpoints. Let's imagine that the conversation shown on the screen took place at a workplace. The information is vague, and you don't know what action to take. However, if this information is expressed in numbers, it helps us understand what is happening and to what extent it is occurring. In quality control, decisions are made and actions are taken based on data that expresses facts objectively. When there is a great deal of data to handle, it is difficult to grasp the meaning just from looking at the figures. In cases like this, the 7 tools for QC are helpful. There are 2 types of data: continuous data and enumerated data. These 2 types have different characteristics, and they are handled in different ways. Thus, when you look at data, you must first understand which type of data they are. For example, when measuring the height of a person, the next increment after 170 centimeters is not always 171 centimeters. It may be any value in between. Height must always be measured rather than counted. Such values are called continuous data. When counting things on our fingers, 1 is always followed by 2. There is nothing in between. Such data obtained by counting are called enumerated data. Data expressed in terms of percentage rates can be a combination of continuous and enumerated data. That is, a continuous data divided by an enumerated data and vice versa. In this case, the denominator is not relevant. The numerator determines whether the value is enumerated or continuous. The most important point to consider when collecting and using data is to clearly define the objectives, such as what is the purpose and what will it be used for. Generally speaking, the purposes of collecting and using data can be classified into these 4 categories. However, as long as the purpose is clear, it is not necessary to stick to these categories. For example, when investigating the occurrence of defective products, the purposes of collecting and using data are to grasp the status quo and analyze the process. When investigating the stability of products, the objectives are process control and quality assurance. No matter how abundant the data may be, you cannot fully utilize them unless you know who collected the data, when, where, and how. It is of vital importance to clarify the conditions of the data collection. Useful data are those that facilitate the implementation of measures. Always try to obtain data as far upstream as possible. Whenever possible, stratify the data from 4M or other viewpoints. In addition, these points shown on the screen should also be observed. Present the collected data in graphs or diagrams so that the overall picture is clearly understood at a glance. This will also make it easy to see size and order. In practice, numerical values ending in 1 through 4 are rounded down, and those ending in 5 through 9 are rounded up. However, when the values need to be more fairly treated, 5 is rounded up or down in accordance with the rules described on the screen. Summarizing the contents covered in this chapter, these are the main points. Read this chapter carefully until you are confident. Then go on to the next understanding test. The purpose of this chapter is to enable you to gain a foothold in understanding facts properly by arranging the features and commonalities of data. In this section, we will study stratification, which is the basis for organizing data. If you fail the test regarding your understanding of the preliminary checkpoints, please study the provided study items. Now, please commence your study of the preliminary checkpoints. If you gather up items of clothing that are scattered around a room and put them away in drawers by category, they become easier to manage, and it is easier to determine the number of items. The same can be said of data. For example, if you wanted to collect data on individual workers, you would separate them into groups according to features and commonalities. This is the meaning of stratification. It has a pre-processing role in all QC tools. Stratification means sorting, comparing, and identifying differences. It is effective in problem solving and questionnaire surveys. Items are sorted into groups called stratification categories. After stratification, it is easy to see the dispersion and differences between the categories and the features and tendencies of each category. Important categories, abnormal categories, and categories that need attention are also revealed. When implementing stratification, we must first clearly define the problems that need to be solved or the things that we want to know. Next, we must decide on the viewpoint and categories of stratification. Here, let's stratify data by defective item. Collect data for each stratification category. This time, count the number of defects of each defective item. Lastly, we can make comparisons between the categories. Graphs would be convenient. If there are differences, we seek out their cause. If there are no differences, then we devise new stratification categories and collect data once again. It is a good idea to use the 7 tools for QC to compare stratified data. For example, assuming that the weekday sales volume is low at a home electric appliance store, we stratify the number of customers visiting the store by day of the week, and then make a graph of the results. We can see that the number of customers on the weekend is very high, but on weekdays, it is only 1/2 to 1/3 of the weekend level. This helps us make a decision. It might be better to do the following. On weekdays, reduce the number of store staff and shorten opening hours. This manpower and these opening hours should be devoted to the weekend. It is easier to identify countermeasures when factors are compared on a graph. In this way, we can visualize a countermeasure. On weekdays, the number of store staff should be reduced and opening hours shortened. This amount of manpower and these opening hours should be devoted to the weekend. Now, however, let's analyze this from a different viewpoint. This time, our viewpoint examines the staff, that is, the 4 shop assistants working in this home electric appliance store. We stratified the sales revenues by individual and then plotted a graph. Mr. A had the highest sales revenues. His revenue was more or less averaged out over each day and was not clustered during the weekend. Also, he sold more than the others even on weekdays. We asked Mr. A what the reason for this was. He said that he served customers differently on weekdays and on holidays. Thus, it seems better to change the way in which customers are served than to change the number of store staff or the opening hours on weekdays. To compare the data items that are stratified from two different viewpoints, we need to ensure that they have been collected under the same conditions, including time and place. Thus, at this point, make a record of the fact that these data items are correlated. In stratification, a good approach is to stratify the results and seek out the differences in various factors, or to stratify the factors and observe the differences in the results. This is an example of stratification that is normally used in quality control. Summarizing the contents covered in this chapter, these are the main points. Read this chapter carefully until you are confident. Then go on to the next understanding test. The purpose of this chapter is to enable you to collect and confirm data suitable for your objectives. In this section, we will study several points relating to the check sheet used to accomplish this. If you fail the test regarding your understanding of the preliminary checkpoints, please study the provided study items. Now, please commence your study of the preliminary checkpoints. The check sheet is one of the 7 tools for QC. It is frequently used for investigations, record keeping, inspections, and confirmation work. There are many types of formats. Here, we will look at check sheet A. Check sheets are pre-formatted sheets. They allow you to collect data easily, verify facts accurately, and organize the results effectively. This check sheet is used to check and record data on defective copies. The data is properly stratified by type of defective item, month and day, day of the week, etc. Here, the number of cases based on the checks is recorded using the frequency symbol. Depending on the type of check sheet, other symbols or check marks may be used. The total can be recorded in numerical units. In this case, a check sheet is used to determine the status quo regarding defective copies. Check sheets are used to prevent omissions in data collection and data processing. It is a good idea to use these omission-free data with other 7 tools for QC too. This is a check sheet for defective copies. Can you see any features emerging? Think carefully and then click on the button. During this week, from the viewpoint of defective items, there were many instances of copies being too light and too dark. From the viewpoint of day of the week, we see that Friday has the highest number of defective copies. On this basis, we can begin to devise countermeasures, such as adjusting the tone of the copy machine and checking the use of the copy machine on Fridays. In this way, using check sheets to collect data reveals the differences, features, tendencies, dispersion, and changes in the data. Let's look at how to make a check sheet on defective copies. First, clearly define the objectives. Know what data you intend to collect. If you want to identify the cause of defective copies from the viewpoint of dates and defective items so that you can eliminate them, state this in the title. This statement will form the basis of the check sheet that we will make. Next, list the defective items that need to be checked. Use this list to decide on the check items. Next, decide on the requisite categories and list them to make them easier to see. Take your check sheet and carry out the checks on site and do a verbal fact-finding survey. Next, record the number of defective copies using the frequency symbol. Now, we will total the results of the check. If there are any points that struck you during your checks, record them in the remarks column as they will help in analysis work. As you use the check sheet in your checking work, note its ease of use, ease of record making, and ease of data organization. If they are not satisfactory, it is important to make improvements. Use check sheets carefully and efficiently. This section provides you with tips and necessary considerations, using this check sheet as an example. If there are too many check items, it will be time-consuming to complete a check, and omissions will be quite likely. Try to limit the number of check items to 10 or less. If there is no record kept of the checks that are made, then there will be no way in which to clarify the facts, for instance, by on-site checks. Ensure that you record all of the requisite information. When the check sheet is completed, we should first analyze the data as a whole and observe overall features. Then, try to identify priority items and study them in depth. This will allow us to focus in on the problem items. It is also important to look at data in time series, that is, chronologically. Pay attention to the changes in the data while observing information on the lapse of time information on the time of day or day of the week, for instance. You will eventually discover various facts, such as the tendencies and periodicity of the data. Once improvements have been made regarding the defective items, the original check sheet format may become irrelevant. As such, we should review the check items constantly. There is no particular format for the check sheet. Just ensure that it covers the required items. Here we will look at two examples. This is a survey and record check sheet covering service response time. Every time a response was provided, it was marked on the check sheet using the frequency symbol according to the time taken. Can you see any features emerging? Think carefully and then click on the button. From this check sheet, we can see that the highest number of responses are at this time, and there are also many around this time. This shows us the distribution pattern, dispersion, and central value. This is a survey and record check sheet covering stains and scratches on cosmetic containers and labels. On the drawing of the subject, different defects were recorded using different symbols. Can you see any features emerging? Think carefully and then click on the button. From this check sheet, in addition to the number of stains and scratches, we can also see where they occurred. We can see that most scratches are in the upper right area, and that the stains tend to predominate in the upper half of the container. Summarizing the contents covered in this chapter, these are the main points. Read this chapter carefully until you are confident. Then go on to the next understanding test. The purpose of this chapter is to enable you to obtain the largest possible amount of it.
We will go straight to Pareto.